Welcome to the Monocle Banking Podcast, where we unpack the strategic shifts, the big ideas, and the real politics shaping Africa's financial future. Today, we're plugging into a topic that's as loaded with politics, I think, as it is with potential. South Africa's just energy transition. You probably heard the promises of clean energy and new jobs and revitalized communities, but I think for many on the ground, if we look at Komati as an example, the reality is a lot more frustrating. Our guest is Peter Venn, who's the CEO of Seriti Green, one of the companies leading the private sector charge in renewables. He recently wrote an op-ed arguing that it takes 3 times longer to get permits for a renewable project than to actually build it. I mean, that disconnect, he says, is costing the country 50 billion rand in lost investment every year. And Venn's not just talking megawatts, he's talking people, he's talking jobs and missed opportunities. His team is building South Africa's largest hybrid renewable energy facility, Ummbila Emoyeni, in Mpumalanga, the heart of coal country. And he's trying to prove that just doesn't have to be an empty adjective in the energy transition. So the big question is whether the private sector really can absorb the economic fallout from coal's decline and overcome some of these regulatory hurdles to ensure that the term just transition doesn't risk becoming a feel-good fiction. So let's find out. Peter, great to have you on the podcast. And maybe let's just begin, before we even talk about the backstory of Seriti Green, to find out how you came to involve yourself professionally in the renewables game.
Thank you for having me on. Yeah, back in 2011, I was in the software industry in oil and gas. An Australian firm, WindLab, wanted to grow their presence in South Africa, and this is pre any renewable energy in South Africa. So I was lucky enough wanting to go back home. I was commuting to Dubai and I wanted to be based in Cape Town. So I made the leap of faith from software and oil and gas across to renewable energy back in 2011 before anything had occurred in the renewable energy sector.
And so you've really seen the evolution over the last 14 odd years of the sector. We've had serious private sector investment through the various REAP rounds until that period where around bid window 4, and we saw Eskom enthralled to state capture agents putting a lid on that. And now we've got the bid windows up and running again with their own issues. But let's just talk about Seriti Green, which is owned by Seriti Resources, I think just over 54%. Very well-known coal company run by Mike Techie. Then there's Venn Energy, 15%. I'd assume that's your company. RMB at just over 15%, and Standard Bank at just over 15%. And then obviously a very experienced board. What was the strategic intent behind spinning out a renewable energy arm from Seriti Resources?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think WindLab being based in Australia and really having, nowadays you would call it wind AI, so really understanding where the wind is, had a great portfolio of development assets across the continent. But each time WindLab got to the point of starting construction, WindLab did not have the capital wherewithal in Africa to take these projects. The capital required to develop a project pre-construction taps out at maybe 100 million rand. The capital wherewithal to build a 150 megawatt project is about 5 billion rand. So that jump from developer to independent power producer, IPP, is a huge jump. And that was the move that Seriti was looking to make approximately 3 years ago. So the timing was right. I was put in charge of a sales process of WindLab Africa assets, and Seriti was in the market to grow the energy portfolio and diversify, not away from coal, but to add to the coal portfolio. So the acquisition closed on the 1st of December, 2.5 years ago, and it has been a fantastic merger of minds between the Seriti Group and then WindLab African assets. And really it's about a meeting of business principles, being entrepreneurial, making decisions, and putting South Africa and the energy transition at the forefront of what we do. And one needs to look at the World Energy Council energy trilemma of affordability, sustainability, and security. And that is really where Seriti is playing, putting all 3 of those things in the bucket. We need coal energy to keep the lights on. We need to build renewables to look at the sustainable piece. And we need to continue to focus on affordability for people across South Africa, across the continent. And, as Seriti grows, so energy is at the forefront of what they do.
And I think that kind of pragmatism that I'm encouraged to hear entering the lexicon, maybe the Overton window might be a better word of how we discuss what the just energy transition means. It initially seemed to be very binary, kind of either or, and we have to move completely away from one particular source of power to completely renewable. And I think what we're seeing is it has to be a blended approach, and we have to do this with a view to ensuring that we keep the cost in mind and the individuals involved in the transition as well. I want to come back to the partnership. You've got RMB, you've got Standard Bank on board. How important is the combination of deep capital as well as technical know-how and project delivery credibility in making the vision of Seriti Vision viable?
There are many parts to a great renewable energy facility. Obviously, you need land where we engage with many of the farmers across South Africa. We need great resource, whether it's from the sun or the wind. We need all the necessary permits. But a significant part of what we do is the capital allocation. These projects are money hungry. They're large capital projects. Ummbila Emoyeni, once fully complete, will be in the region of 25 to 30 billion rand. So having wise people on our board, available in our ecosystem from our shareholders, both Standard Bank and RMB, is critical to the success of an IPP. I think senior leadership in IPP spend the vast majority of their time on capital allocation and ensuring that this capital is available as we go forward. So the first phase of Ummbila Emoyeni, 155 megawatts, where the first turbine went up last week and the last turbine will be erected this year, that project was just over 5 billion rand. And the coal mines of Seriti are actually going to be buying the energy from this project. But again, I come back to the capital, big capital numbers. And then if we look at the just energy transition, it took me a long time to understand JET. And my simple views is the energy transition, the ET piece of that is relatively simple. We need to build as much renewables as we can. It's not coal or renewables, as you say, it's coal and renewables. So for as long as possible, we need to be building as much renewables as we possibly can. But the real challenge is in the just piece. We as the renewable energy sector cannot absorb every single person that's going to come off from the coal sector, be that both the mining and the energy generation. But what we can do in partnership with not only Seriti's coal assets, but all coal miners, is we need to look at the social labor plans. We need to be growing the economy in Mpumalanga, and we need to be growing additional businesses, whatever they may be, so that these jobs are there. We have 1,187 people on site right now. 53% of them are local. Many of them were unemployed last year when we reached financial close on the 4th of April. So our build program will be at least 10 years, subject to us getting the necessary permits. And those are real jobs. Now it's up to us as the largest employer in a town like Morganson to grow out additional job opportunities in a town like Morganson, so that when construction jobs come off in 10 years' time, there are other industries that people can fulfill their lives with.
Let's talk about that before we go into some of those permitting delay issues around working with local communities who have built their livelihoods around coal for generations. What does winning the hearts and minds look like in those kinds of communities?
Number one is being forthright and being present. I think too many investors in rural areas pay lip service to this type of community engagement. We've employed a number of local people that, on a Monday or at the library, on a Tuesday is at the petrol station, on a Wednesday at the town hall, engaging with the people of Darfur, Morganson, Bethel, and further, and really understanding the community needs prior to just going in there. It was one of the challenges with REAP. Every project put forward their requirements, and if each project put forward schools, you might find that there are way too many schools and enough hospitals, for example. So we are in the fortunate position of not being dictated to from a tender process, and we're engaged with the community. So we've started with an agri program We started with a very short program of a month for 150 agri-entrepreneurs, but now we have 20 people on a 2-year program where they're going on site visits, they're understanding, they're going to have mentorship on how to undertake small scale and large scale farming. And at the end of the 2 years, we're going to have capital to help them invest in tractors and other large implements. And through programs like that, we're hoping we are the catalyst, and we're hoping to crowd in other funding so that we can support these emergent farmers and grow that out as a proper industry. So it's about listening. It's about having fantastic contractors that listen to us and in a partnership, because at the end of the day, those 1,187 people are actually employed by our subcontractors that are building the roads, are building the foundations, are doing all the great work that we need to be done on site. And I would say 50% of the jobs in renewable energy, or definitely in wind energy, these are straight translatable jobs straight out of the coal sector. If you're building a road for a coal mine, there's no difference to building a road on a wind farm. Same with building foundations, even rotating equipment. Somebody that's been on the conveyor line of a big coal mine can very easily be transferred over to rotating equipment for a wind turbine.
Yeah, so it doesn't require huge investments in reskilling or retraining. There may be, some investment in that phase, but as you say, highly transferable. When it comes to ensuring that the planning is coherent, that you don't end up with a surplus of clinics or hospitals or that kind of thing, how closely do you work with local and provincial government to ensure that those kinds of services and infrastructure investment are not duplicated and also keep pace with the project rollout?
Let me be frank. I've been so pleasantly surprised by local government over the last 18 months. We have a steering committee meeting with the 4 mayors, 3 from the local and 1 from the district municipalities monthly. We're top of the agenda on these activities. We have an open door policy to be in there. So we have fantastic access to the local governments. We're working closely with them with the needs. So I've been totally surprised. The same goes for provincial government. We have a direct line to the Premier, and we're able to work with all the departments across the Mpumalanga province in ensuring that this occurs. I do believe some of that's because we're first. So there's not a lot of noise in the system, if I can put it that way. When we engage with the local municipality, it's somewhat easy to say, let's do this, let's do that. I think once there are 2 or 3 or 4 projects with different sponsors in the area, it might become a little bit messy, but we're open to working with people that might see them as competitors. We don't believe we have competition. We need to build as much renewables as we can. We're 100% open to working with other renewable energy suppliers and working together and forming these collectives. And the REAP process created somewhat of a competition process to drive tariff down in the beginning of the REAP process, which was fantastic for the people of South Africa. But it led to a kind of combative, competitive landscape, which we don't need to be. Once you have your power purchase agreement, whether it be with Eskom or privately, then we need to work collaboratively to make sure that the communities get the best from these projects.
Yeah, and there's shared infrastructure, and why go and duplicate the costs when one can collaboratively share those costs as well with other project developers in the region. What's your assessment of how Komati was handled? Because it is being held up as, oh, this is how not to do it. And it's become a bit of a political lightning rod, because it seems like your experience has been wholly different.
Difficult to talk about. I wasn't part of the process up front, but yes, I don't believe it was undertaken well. I think you're trying to retrofit renewables into a place that may or may not be the right place to put renewables. I can tell you there's no specific wind around there, so it wouldn't make sense to build that. But the scarcest resource in South Africa in the energy sector at the moment is transmission infrastructure. To be able to access the transmission grid is critical. So Komati could have been handled better. But I think, as we're seeing with private power, i.e. IPP selling directly to end customers, often these legacy organizations, whether it be government or Eskom, just need to get out of the way. Frame the rules, get out of the way, let private sector take this on. But the challenge here is there's many stakeholders and everybody wants to see a piece. I think what we're seeing with the, whichever terminology you want to call it, but the jet funding that people talk billions of dollars, whether they be loans or grants, the vast majority of this money is either gone to Eskom or to consultants. I stand to be corrected. Between 10 and 15% of all the funding in Mpumalanga last year went to projects, and the other 85% or so went to either Eskom or consultants. And I can tell you those consultants' reports are not very valid in what we're doing on the ground.
I think there is a fair critique of the number of carpetbaggers, I'll be frank, that have entered into the process and the program. And clearly you found a model that has managed to avoid that with the kind of expertise that you've got on board. When you talk about grid access, I mean, it is a headache that tripped up other bid window participants in the most recent rounds. How have you avoided that? Is it just because it's an IPP selling directly to the mine that you get to sidestep some of these issues? And, given that the project is massive, I mean, it's a 900 megawatt project, how do you intend to ensure that if you do want to be grid tied in future, it's not something that trips you up?
No, I think to correct you, it's fully grid tied. So we've built 1.4 billion rands worth of infrastructure for Eskom, which we gift to Eskom. So we will transfer the entire substation plus the main substation, which is a 400 kV 132 transformer setup. We will transfer that to Eskom plus some other infrastructure that we'll hand over to Eskom upon COD. So that has been a huge challenge. But look, Mpumalanga has got a lot of transmission. It's the coal heartland. So, back many years ago, 30, 40, 50 years ago, the country was built to take all of the energy generation in Mpumalanga and evacuate it across the country. So the generation and the transmission is not a challenge in Mpumalanga. There are many other challenges. One of the challenges on the Highveld is that we have all the different minerals there. So there's a lot of mineral rights that exist. And I think there's a very public situation going on in the Free State with Renogen at the moment. And this is exactly the point of discussion that needs to happen with regards to renewable energy and mining rights. It's my personal belief that if you're at the point of wanting to build a renewable energy facility and you're at that point and somebody has a exploration right and not a mining right, then the renewable energy plant should trump an exploration right, particularly if it's just a large gas right over vast swathes of hectares. That in Canada, you see gas and wind living quite happily next to each other. So I think there's many of those challenges, but from a transmission perspective, absolutely, we need to improve the grid. We need to upgrade lots of components of the grid to make sure that great wind across the country is able to get into the grid. I think Eskom is fully cognizant of this, and with the NTCSA and all the programs that are going on. But let's be clear, since the first round, but since 2013 when it was built, IPPs have been building private transmission since then. The Eskom self-build transmission program has been going on since 2013 when the first IPPs built substations and have handed this over to Eskom. So the model exists. I think there are some simple ways for us to upgrade this, but it takes partnership, it takes engagement, it takes a will and want to listen on both sides, and that's just not there.
And let's hope that we can take some of those early teething problems and lessons from what's going on around the Renogen story and not see those mistakes repeated, to your point. You've also said, back to the permitting paralysis, that it takes 6 years to get permits and only 2 years to build a renewable facility. I mean, it's just an astonishing indictment of the system. Who's actually responsible for this bottleneck? And how do we just overcome this to ensure that we get the right balance? Because obviously you want to be able to ensure that you're giving permits legitimately and there's the correct environmental impact assessment and all of that. But for it to take 6 years to get a permit and only 2 years to build a renewable facility is just madness.
It is madness. Look, the simple truth is it's a total lack of coordination. My fantastic development team, that's what they do on a day-to-day basis. Coordinate, and it's numerous bodies. I'm going to leave many off the list, but you need things from civil aviation, you need items from the Department of Fisheries, Forestries, Environment, you need items from the Department of Electricity, you need a generation license from NERSA, you need water license from the Department of Water, roads, provincial roads, local roads, you need rezoning from local municipalities that have never done this before. So I can tell you that there's well over 150 different aspects that you need to tick off. And there's just zero coordination from a government perspective. There should be quite simply a registration number that you register. And as you go through the process, so, when you're further along, government leans in and says, okay, this project is on the cusp or is near, let's really prioritize this. And there is just no coordination between the various bodies. I'm just use a very made up example, but let's say you have to do something for the government and then it says they've got 90 days to respond. Government sees the 90 days to respond as the first time that they will even communicate with you. You're more likely to hear from them after 120, 180 days of you shouting at them. There's no reason why they couldn't respond in 30 days or 40 days. The 90 days is the outer limit of when they must. And that's what we see. If you take rezoning, for example, what we get is a special dispensation on agricultural land to build renewable energy. Why can't the Minister of Agriculture or the President, whoever, give that special dispensation to all land in South Africa? All agricultural land now has a special dispensation for agriculture. There are many other ways that'll pick up if you're taking away very productive farming land, for example, through your EIA. But there's no reason to do rezoning across the country in every single municipality for getting the special dispensation. All agricultural land should have a special dispensation for renewable energy. One government gazette on a Friday, and you do away with an entire permit that is truthfully, kind of not worth the paper that it's written on.
It seems so obvious, Peter, and given that we've had Operation Vulindlela and the likes of Rudy Dex and Saul Musker working on these kinds of issues, we had Sipho Nkosi, I think, who was also appointed. He was the first CEO of Exxaro as the president's red tape czar. Has government heard your pleas? And why is nothing being done about something that seems so obvious?
I'm not sure. I'm exasperated. I do believe at the top level there's alignment on the want, the need. But when you go down one level, there's purely a lack of education. There's purely a lack of engagement. And I'm talking internally in all the governments and government agencies. There's total lack of alignment. When you go talk to the Mpumalanga Provincial Department of Environment, they are totally misaligned with even national, but definitely anything else strategic. So we just don't have alignment within government to get, as I've said, and I'm being extremely conservative, 50 billion rand of investment is being coughed a year based on this.
Do you think that it's time for Seriti Green or maybe the IPP sector, or one of the renewable bodies, to formally quantify and research and publish these losses and then really start lobbying, National Treasury? Or is the lobbying come to naught, and do we just need, let's be brutally honest, if government hasn't fixed this by now, isn't it time for the private sector to demand legislative mandates for permitting timeframes? Because soft lobbying just isn't working.
So, yes, I think the Energy Council with James McKay as its lead is doing a great job and really being collaborative with government. So I do believe many of these things are well known. But I think the elephant in the room is Eskom, and Eskom's want to also be an IPP, right? A renewable IPP.
Yeah.
And maybe you can't use the word I in there as an independent, but I think that's really the challenge. At the end of the day, at the moment, Eskom is judge, jury, and executioner with regards to these projects. Eskom can pick and choose who their competitors are in the renewable energy space. Eskom can ring fence areas. There's no transparency in how Eskom allows you to access the grid. None. And that just leads to, at best, we're unaware. And at worst, Eskom can choose as to where and what Eskom wants as their competitors when it comes to renewables. So, until the Eskom grid access process is transparent and until the rules are clear and sensible, I think we live in this world of we just put in our paperwork and wait.
And it's clear, the incentives are there for Eskom to use its lobbying power to maintain and entrench a monopoly position as best as it can. And that's what monopolies do. That's where you need regulators and the government to intervene a little bit more forcefully. And I think questions have got to be asked there. Deputy Minister Graham Mayer was speaking at the Africa Energy Forum last week about industrializing renewables through SAREM. What's your view on that? Is it aspirational or achievable?
No, it's aspirational and it's quite simple. I mean, you alluded to earlier, we had a 7-year hiatus on revenue. Lots of my friends had a 7-month hiatus of revenue during COVID. And I just said, look, wait a couple of years and you know what my life's been over the last 7 years. So I'm talking round 4 through round 5 through a failed round. We had no revenue for 7 years. And you're well aware of the tower factory in Coca that liquidated after Vestas and many others put a lot of effort and money into that tower factory.
Yeah.
Once bitten, twice shy. The problem we have at the moment, the challenge we have is there's no pipeline and there's no certainty. The IRP has some very low megawatt numbers in the hundreds for a couple of years coming out. There's no certainty and agreed way forward with regards to the pipeline. And there is absolutely no way investors are going to invest in a tower factory or a blade factory or a panel factory, solar PV panel factory, if you don't know if there's going to be generation next year, the year after, the year after. These factories, I'm not an expert, but these factories must take 10 years to pay off.
Yeah.
And you can very easily see a point in 2-3 years' time where suddenly, for some crazy regulation change, I mean, there's this talk of the tariff increase on renewables. That's going to do more things to harm the industry than try and create jobs locally, because you can't build these factories overnight. So customers are not going to buy electricity because the price of electricity is going to go up by 10-20% and push it closer to Eskom. At the end of the day, while some customers are looking for green electrons, many of them are looking for a discount on the Eskom price. And if the tariff is getting closer to Eskom, customers will just go, well, I buy from Eskom. I don't need to put up guarantees. I don't need to sign long-term offtake. I can just buy from Eskom. So industry needs to come together. You almost need a backstop. If you want to get those things going, you need a backstop to say, let's do this. What they've done in South America, I believe it's Brazil, is the likes of DBSA and IDC provided more concessional financing into these projects because they're heavily geared, circa 75-80%. And that concessional finance was conditional on you having X local percentage. That is a far better way to incentivize the industry to grow local components. There's a project currently in South Africa, wind farm, that has gone local for the right reasons and is now a year late. Now, I can tell you the interest on 5 billion for a year, I mean, we can all think it 500 to 700 million in interest because the project's late, because that project committed through the REAP rounds to be local and have built concrete towers and is a year late.
Yeah, and sadly, as you say, once bitten, twice shy. It's a question of rebuilding trust in the eyes of investors, and to go and put the localization cart before the IPP industry growth horse just doesn't make much sense to anyone. And we look at our potential. I know offshore, the World Bank reckons we've got just over 900 gigawatts of offshore potential. If you were to see the policy chips fall ideally for South Africa, what is the potential here that we're leaving on the table for the growth of our wind sector in particular?
As I say, I think we can comfortably get to 50 to 100 billion a year in investment. As I've said, these projects are hungry. If you drive now down the N1 like I did 2 weeks ago, there are many projects on the side of the road. I don't see much other industrialization in rural areas other than renewable energy. And there is a huge opportunity to make the permitting easy, pre-permit some areas, auction these out. There is no lack of funding, no lack of funding. The AFC believes there's $1.1 trillion available for infrastructure in Africa. It's not about funding. It's about some legislation. It's about making it easier. It's about making it regular. And I'm very comfortable that we can see, let's say, 20 to 30,000 jobs being created in the wind sector.
Yep.
If we can get to 5 gigawatts being built a year. And then, I'm a huge fan of the Southern African power pool, the East African power pool, except for one interconnector between Tanzania and Zambia. Right now, you can sell electrons from Cape Town to Cairo. And now, we always talk about hard currency being difficult to attract into Africa. But that's the opportunity to export energy out of Africa into Europe, into the Middle East, get hard currency into the continent. It is possible today. So Again, I think we should be building wind and solar as quickly as possible. We should be driving that both local, and that was my other call at AEF, driving local investment and foreign investment into these projects, and we should be moving forward. Then it gives government the choice as to when coal comes off. At the moment, there's no choice.
Yeah.
The choice for government at the moment, turn off a coal power station, get more load shedding. That's the choice. We are not keeping up with GDP growth, not that that's much, and we're not keeping up with population growth. So we are not just keeping the lights on. Load shedding is here for a long time.
That was Peter Venn, CEO of Seriti Green, helping us understand what indeed a just transition looks like when it moves from dairy to steel and cement and lives on the ground, and just the kind of opportunity that is present currently if we can deal with some of the regulatory bottlenecks and some of the eminently solvable challenges that are still holding the long-term growth of the sector back. Join us next time on the Monocle Banking Podcast as we continue talking about the big ideas reshaping Africa's financial future. I'm Michael Avery. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to like and subscribe and share amongst your networks. Take care.